Hi folks, it's Sarah here, and I just finished a really great book that is nominated for the International Booker Prize. And since the announcement of the winner of the prize is only a few days away on May 26th, I thought it would be a perfect time to come chat about it. The book is called Elena Knows, and it's by Claudia Piñeiro, and it's published by Charco Press. And I actually have a small little library of Charco Press books that I'll also show briefly. But first I thought we could chat about Elena Knows because it was such a great novel. I think there's a lot here to digest and think about. So here we go. Elena Knows is a novel by Argentine author Claudia Piñeiro, and it was translated by Frances Riddle. Claudia Piñeiro first wrote the book in 2007, and it was translated and published by Charco Press in 2021. So not only has it been shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, but it was also one of the nominees for the Barbellion Prize, which is a prize for a book that depicts life with a chronic illness or a disability. Claudia Piñeiro is from Buenos Aires. She's a best-selling author, and she's known mostly for literary crime fiction. And Elena Knows is the story of a woman in her 60s. Her name is Elena, and she is trying to prove that her daughter, Rita, was murdered when everyone else in the community that she lives in Buenos Aires believes that Rita committed suicide. So the book is the quest that Elena sets out on to prove that her daughter was indeed murdered. Elena also has Parkinson's disease, so her day is ruled not by the clock, but by the pills that she has to take in order to get her body to even move. The novel takes place during a single day when Elena takes her morning pill in order to get her body moving so that she can embark on a journey across Buenos Aires. She's looking for a woman she hasn't seen in several decades named Isabel, and Elena believes that Isabel is the last remaining person who can help her prove that Rita was murdered. I've seen this novel marketed as crime fiction, but I don't think you should pick up this book thinking it's going to be a traditional crime or mystery novel. I think it might be marketed that way due to the way Piñeiro's other novels were written, though I don't know for sure since I haven't read them. But I wouldn't call this a crime novel in the traditional sense. I would maybe think about the word crime more broadly here, like the kinds of wrongdoings we commit against others, whether they be strangers or our loved ones every single day, or the crimes our bodies commit against us as we age or as we become ill, or even the crimes that institutions like the government or the church or maybe even the medical profession commit against individuals. It's a different way of thinking about the word crime, and for me, it actually helped me rethink the definition of what could be crime fiction. Crime can be something other than a murder or a theft. It can be much more broad. Whenever I start a new book or a new short story, I like to take note of the moment in the narrative that first took my breath away or made my heart skip a beat or made me sit up a little bit straighter in bed or in the chair. The moment that really hooked me, I guess you could call it the hook. And I always draw a little fish hook next to that, or my interpretation of a fish hook next to that moment, so that I remember exactly what it was that really drew me in and said, okay, this is gonna be good. And in Elena Knows, that first moment that really grabbed my attention was when I realized that the author was going to be using the phrase Elena knows in a repetitive way throughout the narrative. And I think it was only the second time she used it. It was within the first 2 pages, but she used the phrase Elena knows. And I realized that that term was going to mean more than just the title. It was going to make its way through the narrative. And that's when I sat up and said, okay, that's interesting. I like that. That's really interesting. And when you're writing fiction and you make a stylistic choice like that, you have to do it for a good reason. You can't just repeat any old phrase. There has to be some depth and complexity to it. The phrase that that you choose has to be able to twist and turn along with the story. It has to be able to make itself new again and be open to different interpretations and ways of using the phrase. And I think that the way that Piñeiro uses the phrase Elena knows is a really great example of that. So once I put the book down, I had a nice long think about the phrase Elena knows. So what does Elena know? So she knows facts. She knows the terms dopamine and levodopa because she has Parkinson's disease, and she has learned those terms from her doctor. She knows things in terms of like knowing as in familiarity. She knows her daughter really well because they've lived together for so long. She knows her neighborhood and she knows her neighbors and she knows all of their quirks. She knows her body and its limitations now that she has Parkinson's disease and it continues to advance. There's also knowing as a kind of faith, knowing something even if you don't have proof of it. So for example, Elena knows that there's no way Rita could have killed herself because she was afraid to go. Rita hung herself. This isn't a spoiler because it happens right in the beginning. She hung herself from the church belfry, but she was afraid to go up there when it was raining because she was afraid of lightning. So Elena knows that Rita couldn't have killed herself. Elena also knows that this woman, Isabel, can give her answers. She doesn't know why she knows that, but she just somehow knows it. So it's kind of an act of faith. This type of knowing. There's also things that you know but you can't do anything about. For example, Elena knows how easy it is to take a step. She knows how to take a step, but her body can't do it. She knows how to do it, and that's the first scene, the first sentence is Elena knowing how to move her right foot in front of her left foot, but she can't do it. There are also the kinds of things that you know deep down, but you don't admit to yourself. So that's another way of knowing something, that there's somewhere inside of you that knows something but won't admit it, or you aren't conscious of knowing it. And I think that says a lot about Elena's relationship with her daughter and maybe things she knows about Isabel as well. And then finally, there's the things that you know, like you know, wink, wink, but you don't know, you're wrong about. So there are things that Elena knows, she knows, but she's wrong. And so that's kind of the last version of knowing in the novel. And then the last sentence of the book is one word. It's a single word sentence. And I'm not going to tell you what that word is, but it turns the phrase Elena knows on its head. It completely changes the meaning of Elena knows. And I think that's brilliant. I loved the last word, and kind of a little quirk of mine is when I'm reading a book, when I finish a book, is I go back and I look at what the first word was and then what the last word was. And sometimes it is nonsense, it doesn't mean anything, but sometimes it seems poignant to whatever the story is. When I read the premise of this book about a mother trying to prove that her daughter was murdered, I pictured a very different mother-daughter relationship than actually is true in the book. I pictured somehow something more loving and warmer, and I'm really glad I had that misconception because it emphasizes the dominant cultural attitudes of what a mother's relationship should be with their child, that it should be loving and warm, because that is not how I would describe Elena and Rita's relationship. It is much more complex than that. They don't treat each other very well. Rita does not treat her mother with kindness at all, especially as her mother continues to get more and more sick and less able to do things for herself. Elena isn't particularly kind to Rita either, and it's just a very complicated relationship. But at the same time, they are true caregivers for one another, especially at the end, Rita giving care to her mother through her Parkinson's disease. And you can tell that there is resentment. I mean, it's very obvious that there's a lot of resentment between the two of them about the caretaking that they've had to give to each other over the years because of the nature of what a mother-daughter relationship is supposed to be. Motherhood itself is a big theme in the novel. The expectations on a mother, placed on a mother, the expectations placed on a woman to become a mother, a woman's right to choose whether to become a mother, at what stage in a woman's life they are allowed to choose whether to become a mother. This theme is throughout the book, and from what I've read, throughout a lot of Piñeiro's fiction writing and also advocacy work. She is very well known in Argentina for her work in women's rights and fighting for women's rights. And so this book, I would say, is extremely timely. So it's interesting. I haven't read any of the other books for the International Booker Prize shortlist this year, but given how timely this book is, maybe it has more of a chance of winning. The novel is broken into 3 sections based on the 3 pills that Elena needs to take in order to be able to move her body at all. The morning pill, the midday pill, and the afternoon pill. She needs these pills in order to make her journey across Buenos Aires to visit Isabel. The pages are really dense and the sentences are really long. There aren't a lot of paragraph breaks, and there's no break or quotation marks for dialogue either. To me, this really mirrored Elena's physical state. Elena can't move her neck or even look up, and so she's always looking in the same direction all of the time. And that means that when people speak to her, she can't look up and meet them in the eye. So the way dialogue is included within the body of the paragraph rather than with quotations and after a break mirrors how Elena hears what people are saying to her but can't see the words being spoken from the person's mouth. The dense pages and long sentences are paired with really short chapters usually, and this makes for a very propulsive reading experience. Piñeiro really propels you through the story. It feels like she's force-feeding it to you. And it's just like Elena is forcing her body to make this journey across the city, and how the levodopa is forcing its way through her veins in order to get the message from her brain to her feet that it's time to move. This pushing and forceful movement is also relevant plot-wise, since a lot of this is about control or lack of control that women have over their bodies. So I loved how all of that came together, that the style and the prose and the form and the structure really matched the themes and the story and the characters and the situations that the characters were in. So I think I've mentioned that the novel takes place in one single day. So Piñeiro makes extensive use of flashbacks so that we can understand more of Elena's situation and the context around the story and around her journey to see Isabel. And flashbacks can be so tricky. They really have to be massaged into place so they don't seem like they're coming out of nowhere. And I think Piñeiro does a really good job. She uses a lot of physical cues to launch Elena's thoughts into the past and taking us with her so that we can see the important, significant moments in the past that have relevance for the story of what's happening on this single day. So for example, on page 19, Elena is walking through her neighborhood to get to the train station, and she realizes she's about to cross these black and white paving tiles, and that pushes her into her mind a memory of a day long ago when she and Rita were walking over those same tiles. And that day has a lot of significance for the story, and it involves Isabel, and it comes back. And so Piñeiro uses that moment on the day we're on when Elena is about to walk over these tiles to give us the flashback. And so that works perfectly. Really, there are 3 big things craft-wise that I'll probably take with me from this novel. So first of all, there's that repeated phrase. I love a good repeated phrase, something that has complexity, like I mentioned, something that can twist and turn as the story moves along, like Elena Knows. And I think I'm going to try to use that in some of my writing, because I think it's a lot of fun to play with. It's fun to think about words and take a word like know, to know, knows, and think of all the different ways you can use that word and all of the different meanings that word has and connotations and all of that. So I definitely will be thinking more about that within my own writing. So my second takeaway is how much I love when form matches content. So the pacing and the sentence structure and the paragraph structure and the chapter structure all matched the content and the story of Elena pushing her way through the city of Buenos Aires to get to Isabel's house, and of the levodopa pushing its way through her body to get her body to move, and of the knowledge about Rita's past pushing its way to Elena's brain and just having a lot of trouble getting there. So that is something I love to think about, form and content. And it's not necessarily something that I like to go into a story thinking about because that can make it a little bit artificial maybe. But once you get writing and once you have some good thoughts down, it's really fun to go back and say, well, does the form that I'm writing this in match kind of the deeper themes that I seem to be thinking about here? And I think that's just such a fun thing to think about and experiment with. Finally, I really do love a good story that's condensed into a really short time period. I think it is such a great constraint to put on yourself to do that. And I do love it when an author can incorporate flashbacks and backstory really seamlessly within that. And so that's something that I will be paying more attention to within my own writing. So for example, I do have a story I'm working on where a character is sitting in a particular chair in a doctor's office, and the chair reminds him of a living room that he sat in once, and that kind of takes him back to a significant memory from his past. And so just making sure that if I ever need to use a flashback, that it really is seamlessly incorporated and flows nicely with the rest of the narrative. So if any of those craft takeaways spark anything for you, or if you've read this book and have other takeaways, I hope you'll comment below, because I think it would be really fun to chat about craft in this novel and what we might take away from it and use in our own work. So finally, I'll add that Claudia Piñeiro has mentioned in interviews, and specifically in an interview in Southwest Review with her translator, Frances Riddle, that part of the core of this story was inspired by Piñeiro's own mother, who did have Parkinson's. And that was really the spark, an image of a woman sitting in her kitchen waiting for her medicine to sink in so that she could move, was the initiating image for this novel for Piñeiro. And I'll read a quote because I thought it was really moving. So in the interview, Piñeiro says, "It's also a disease that, as Elena experiences, people often look away from. The sensation I had was that my mother stopped being seen when she began to suffer from this illness. People are often uncomfortable looking at someone when they have an illness that's visible in the body, worse still if it's visible in the face. So in a way, Elena Knows was a way to put my mother's sick body right in the foreground. Anyone who wants to read that book has to look at her. They have no other choice but to look at this person and see what is happening to her." So now about the publisher, Charco Press. This is a UK publisher that focuses on Latin American literature published in English translation. Charco means puddle in Spanish, and I guess colloquially it is in some countries how people refer to the Atlantic Ocean as the puddle. So if you're traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, you might be crossing the puddle. Charco Press is bringing this wonderfully curated selection of beautiful literature across the puddle and translating it into English and bringing it in to English-speaking communities. So I, in turn, placed an order to have a stack shipped back across the puddle from the UK to Chicago so that I could have my own little library of just a small selection of their amazing books. So here's my little stack. I'm going to go through them really quickly here just so you can see what I got. So obviously we have Elena Knows by Claudia Pinero. And then another book that I believe was nominated for the International Booker Prize, and actually I'm reading it right now and it's really amazing, by Gabriela Cabezon Camara, translated by Fiona McIntosh and Iona McIntyre. It's The Adventures of China Iron. It takes place in 1872, the Pampas of Argentina. China is a young woman eking out an existence in a remote gaucho encampment. After her no-good husband is conscripted into the army, China bolts for freedom, setting off on a wagon journey through the Pampas in the company of her newfound friend Liz, a settler from Scotland. While Liz provides China with a sentimental education and schools her in the nefarious ways of the British Empire, their eyes are opened to the wonders of Argentina's richly diverse flora and fauna, cultures and languages, as well as to the ruthless violence involved in nation building. This subversive retelling of Argentina's foundational gaucho epic, Martin Fierro, is a celebration of the color and movement of the living world, the open road, love and sex, and the dream of lasting freedom. Federico Falco, A Perfect Cemetery, translated by Jennifer Croft, and this is short stories. In the middle of a blizzard, a widow watches the ruin of her late husband's garden until suddenly she sees a woman running naked in the falling snow. A town's mayor tries to fulfill his father's dying wish to design the perfect cemetery. The mountains of Argentina pulse with life in these disarming stories of people radically reinventing themselves in order to find love and connection, escape their pasts, and seek a way out of the banalities of sorrow and loss in the present. Ariana Harwitz, Die My Love, translated by Sarah Moses and Carolina Orloff, long listed for the Man Booker International Prize, as it says on the cover. In a forgotten patch of French countryside, a woman is battling her demons, embracing exclusion yet wanting to belong, craving freedom whilst feeling trapped, yearning for family life but wanting to burn the entire house down. Given surprising leeway by her family for her increasingly erratic behavior, she nevertheless feels ever more stifled and repressed. Motherhood, womanhood, the banality of love, the terrors of desire, the brutality of another person carrying your heart forever. Die My Love faces all this with a raw intensity. It's not a question of if a breaking point will be reached, but rather when, and how violent a form will it take. Ooh. And then I have 3 books by Selva Amada. So Selva Amada, The Wind That Lays Waste, translated by Chris Andrews. The wind that lays waste begins in the great pause before a storm. Reverend Pearson is an evangelist preaching the word of God across northern Argentina with his daughter Lenny in tow. When their car breaks down, fate leads them to the workshop of an aging mechanic, Gringo Brower, and his assistant, a boy called Tapioca. Over the course of a long day, curiosity and a sense of new opportunities develop into an unexpected intimacy. Yet this encounter between a man convinced of his righteousness and one mired in cynicism and apathy will become a battle for the very souls of the young pair. As tensions among the 4 ebb and flow, beliefs are questioned and allegiances tested until finally the growing storm breaks over the plains. Also by Selva Amada, Dead Girls, translated by Annie McDermott. Selva Amada tackles the issue of gender violence in this hybrid work that follows the tradition of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood and John Hersey's Hiroshima. Evoking with intimate first-hand knowledge the heat and dust of provincial Argentina, with all its secrets and conflicting loyalties, Almada tells the stories of 3 small-town teenage girls murdered in the early 1980s as the country was celebrating its return to democracy. 3 deaths that were never brought to justice and occurred long before the term femicide became widely known. 19-year-old Andrea Dane stabbed in her own bed, 15-year-old Maria Luisa Quevedo raped, strangled, and dumped in a wasteland, and 20-year-old Sarita Mundine, whose disfigured body washed up on a riverbank. In this brutal yet deeply important book, Selva Amada weaves these and other cases of violence against women into a clear-eyed, multifaceted account that has global resonance. This is not a police chronicle, although there is an investigation. It's not a thriller, although there is mystery and suspense. Hard-hitting and lyrical, Almada blazes a new trail in journalistic fiction. Good. And finally, also Selva Amada, Brickmakers, translated by Annie McDermott. This was also just published in the US by Grey Wolf, another great independent publisher. 2 young men, Pajero Tamay and Marciano Miranda, are dying in a deserted amusement park. The story begins almost at its end, just after the 2 main characters have faced off in a knife fight, the culmination of a rivalry that has pitted them against one another since childhood. The present in Brickmakers is a state of impending death, at moments marked by dreamlike visions. Marciano is visited by the ghost of his father, who was murdered when he was a teenager, a father he had sworn to avenge, and a promise he could not keep. Pajaro is also visited in a recurring nightmare by his abusive father, who disappeared years earlier. Brickmakers is a rural tragedy in the great American tradition, a story of love, honor, violence, where everything is at stake. Reprising the powerful imagery of the filmic landscape of the wind that lays waste and the threatening atmosphere of dead girls, Brickmakers is yet another proof of Amada's extraordinary talent. I'm so excited! So I can't wait. Maybe I'll do like a reading vlog or something with these, because they all sound so good. I also think that the covers are so absolutely beautiful. The colors are great, and that matters. A lot of thought and artistry goes into designing a book. It's not just the author's words that you find on the inside, though of course that matters too, but so many people come together to put out a book, and I get a lot of joy imagining the exact individuals that come together to produce something that I can hold in my hands and smell and read and lose myself in. An actual object, a beautiful object that I can then open and forget even is an object, because I'm so lost in the story. So thanks so much for joining me. I really want to continue doing these deep dives into books published by independent presses. I think it's really fun and valuable from a writing perspective, and fun from a reading perspective too. I hope there are other maybe aspiring writers who are out there who might be interested in joining me and chatting about these books and what they spark inside of you as you're working on your own craft. I do love books that are published by big publishers, and I read them all the time, but there's something so special about the independent publishers and the books that they put out. I think with the independent publishers, you get more variety in styles, and you often get something that you can really chew on for a long time after you've finished the book. And I really like to imagine the process of these independent publishers in curating their selection of books so that they're putting out a collection that means something to them as a publisher and speaks to their mission. So Charco Press, for example, all of their books so beautifully fit into what they have put out in the world as their mission and their strength and what they are bringing to readers. And I love being able to go to a publisher and know kind of the collection that they're going to be providing to me and others as readers, and thinking about that curation and that process of creating a story that is bigger than just the story in the individual book itself. And that is one of the really beautiful things that I love about seeking out work from independent publishers. So if you are interested in talking more about that, I hope you'll hit subscribe, because it's just so much fun. In the meantime, I am probably going to go read a book now, and I hope you do too. Bye.